Harper Jones stepped out of her car, the afternoon sun casting a golden hue over the police station's brick walls. She paused for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun remind her that she had arrived not just at a new precinct but at the helm of her career. She adjusted her badge, feeling the weight of her new title as chief of police for the quiet yet deeply traditional town of Bucksville. The title had a certain ring to it, a testament to the years she'd spent climbing the ranks, outworking and outsmarting opponents who doubted her every step of the way. As she walked toward the station's doors, she could feel the eyes on her, peering through the windows. A few officers exchanged glances, whispering to each other, their faces twisted with skepticism and, yes, hostility. Harper was no stranger to such reactions. She'd grown accustomed to seeing doubt in people's eyes, a reflex she faced not because of her qualifications, but because of her skin color and gender. Inside, the faint hum of conversation ceased the moment she entered. Silence, thick and heavy, blanketed the room. Men in uniform looked up from their desks, their eyes narrowing, expressions unreadable but loaded. A tall man with a stern jawline and graying hair stepped forward, the lines on his face tightening as he extended a hand, his posture more dutiful than welcoming. "Chief Jones," he said, the words clipped and brisk. "I'm Deputy Marshal Roberts." She shook his hand, meeting his gaze with a calm confidence. "Good to meet you, Deputy Roberts." He didn't smile. Instead, he gave a barely perceptible nod before introducing the others. One by one, she saw the faces of her team, Officers Wilson, Kane, Bradshaw, and Carter. None of them offered smiles, and the stiffness in their postures was unmistakable. "Boys, meet Chief Jones," Roberts said, his tone bearing an edge of reluctance. The men mumbled obligatory greetings, their eyes darting away quickly, as if looking at her too long might be contagious. Harper kept her face neutral, offering a small nod in return. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you," she said, her voice strong and steady. "I've read up on your cases, and I'm eager to get to know each of you and the unique challenges Bucksville faces." A chuckle escaped one of the officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a smirk that barely concealed his contempt. Harper's gaze flicked over to him, and he held it, defiant. She felt a chill run through the room, the shared hostility tangible, almost pulsing. Roberts cleared his throat. "If you'll follow me, Chief, I'll show you to your office." As she followed him down the hallway, Harper took in her surroundings. The walls were lined with faded pictures of former police chiefs, all white men in starched uniforms, staring solemnly into the camera. She felt their gazes follow her as she passed, as if they, too, were sizing her up, questioning her place here. Roberts stopped at a door, gesturing for her to enter. The office was small but neat, with a desk and chair, a filing cabinet, and a window overlooking the street. As she set her things down, Roberts lingered in the doorway, watching her. "Is there something on your mind, Deputy?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. He hesitated, a flicker of something, maybe unease, maybe resentment, crossing his face. I hope you know Bucksville's a different kind of place, Chief. Folks around here don't take too well to changes." Harper's smile was faint but unwavering. "I'm here to serve the people of Bucksville. I'll do whatever it takes to protect and improve this community, whether they like the changes or not." Roberts's expression hardened, and he gave a brief nod before leaving her alone. As the days passed, Harper's presence stirred up quiet, simmering resistance among the officers. She observed their reactions carefully, how they fell silent when she entered a room, how they exchanged glances, often laced with disdain, whenever she issued orders or offered insights. When she asked for case files, they conveniently went missing or arrived late, riddled with inaccuracies. Requests for updates on ongoing investigations were met with delays and curt responses. Despite the resistance, she refused to waver. She took each delayed report, each sideways comment, and each cold stare as another layer of armor, another reason to prove herself. She stayed late every night, meticulously studying case files, poring over crime statistics, and preparing plans to improve the precinct's efficiency. The cases in Bucksville had been stagnant for too long, and she knew it. If the men here wouldn't respect her as a leader, she'd make them respect her as a cop. One night, as she was going over an unsolved burglary case, she heard a knock at her door. She looked up to see Officer Kane standing there, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. "Something I can help you with, Officer Kane?" she asked. Keeping her tone professional, he shifted uncomfortably, looking as if he was trying to summon the courage to speak. "I heard you're planning to reopen the Carter cold case," he said, his tone edged with skepticism. "That one's been dead for years. Waste of time, if you ask me." She regarded him for a moment, noting the slight sneer in his voice. "Well, I don't recall asking your opinion, Officer Kane," she replied calmly, "but since you're here, maybe you'd like to walk me through your findings when you were working on it." The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of unease. "That won't be necessary, Chief," he muttered before turning to leave. As the days stretched into weeks, Harper tackled every case with a steely determination. Each solved case and closed file another step forward. She began to notice subtle shifts in some of her officers, traces of respect softening their hardened expressions, though others still clung stubbornly to their hostility. Yet she remained undeterred, focused on the task at hand. Aware that her greatest challenge was yet to come, Harper was no stranger to adversity. As she settled into her new role, memories of past challenges fueled her resolve. From her first days in the academy, she'd fought harder, studied longer, and endured more than many of her peers. She was aware that her presence, her title, and even her achievements made some people uncomfortable, especially those who believed that a black woman had no place leading men in uniform. But she also knew that once she proved herself, she'd make allies, or at least earn respect. That was the plan. A week into her tenure, she held her first team meeting. She scanned the room as her officers shuffled in reluctantly, their expressions guarded, some tinged with open defiance. She addressed them with a calm authority, briefing them on her plans for the precinct's efficiency, upcoming shifts in case handling, and her intentions to tighten security measures in Bucksville, a town that, for all its outward charm, had been dealing with a surge in petty crime and unresolved cases. But as she laid out her vision, Officer Bradshaw interrupted, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Chief, with all due respect, you're new here. We know this town, its people. Bucksville's not some big city where you can come in and shake things up. Maybe you should ease in, learn the ropes." Harper looked at him, a measured calm in her eyes. "Thank you for your input, Officer Bradshaw," she replied, her tone unflinching. "But I'm here to do my job. And part of that job is to make sure we solve cases, protect this town, and uphold the law. I didn't come here to take it easy or learn the ropes. I came here to make a difference." The room was silent, her message hanging in the air like a challenge. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, others scowled. Deputy Roberts, who had been watching from the back of the room, gave a barely perceptible nod, though Harper couldn't tell if it was a gesture of support or merely acknowledgement of her authority. After the meeting, Harper stayed behind, organizing her notes and mulling over the tension she'd just witnessed. Her gaze fell on the Carter cold case, a file she'd studied every night since her arrival. It was an unsolved murder that had left the town shaken several years ago. A young woman, Emily Carter, had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. Yet no arrests had ever been made. From her review of the case, Harper suspected it had been mishandled. Clues were overlooked, interviews were cut short, and leads were left unpursued. It was a glaring example of the kind of complacency she was determined to uproot in this department. The next morning, she announced her intention to reopen the Carter case. Her decision was met with immediate resistance. "It's a waste of time, Chief," Officer Wilson grumbled, his arms folded across his chest. "That case is dead in the water. We've all moved on." She looked around, meeting each officer's eyes. "I haven't moved on, and neither should any of you if we have unsolved cases on our watch. The Carter family deserves justice. And so does this community. If any of you have details that weren't in the report, now would be the time to share." The room fell silent. Bradshaw glanced at Wilson, exchanging a knowing look, but neither man spoke. That evening, as she pored over the case files in her office, Harper heard a low voice outside her door. She leaned closer, listening. "Can you believe her?" Bradshaw was saying. "Coming in here, acting like she's better than us. What does she know about Bucksville anyway?" "Not a damn thing," Wilson replied, his tone dripping with resentment. "She's gonna find out soon enough that this town doesn't need her kind of leadership. Let her spin her wheels on the Carter case. It'll lead her nowhere." Harper's grip on her pen tightened, but she remained still, letting their words sink in. She'd encountered this kind of resistance before. The unspoken rule in precincts like Bucksville was that respect had to be earned. But in her case, respect was something they had no intention of giving, at least not without a fight. She leaned back, eyes narrowing in determination. If they thought she'd give up or walk away, they were sorely mistaken. The following week, Harper worked relentlessly, tackling both current cases and the Carter file, piecing together evidence with a skill and determination that set her apart. Each morning, she briefed her team, assigning new tasks, re-evaluating procedures, and holding them accountable in a way they weren't accustomed to. When they resisted, she pushed harder. If they didn't bring results, she made it clear they'd be staying late until they did. One evening, as she wrapped up her notes, Officer Carter, one of the younger members of the force, typically quiet and reserved, approached her desk. "Chief Jones," he began, his voice low, I heard you're reopening the Carter case. I just wanted to say, well, I think it's the right call. Emily was my sister's friend. She was a good kid. And I don't think justice was ever really done." Harper looked at him, surprised. In the brief time she'd been there, Officer Carter had avoided eye contact, rarely speaking more than a few words. His quiet show of support was unexpected, but it gave her a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Officer Carter," she replied. "Your perspective means a lot. If you know anything that could help, anything that wasn't in the official report, I'd appreciate it." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. There were things left out of the report. The family always felt that something didn't add up, but nobody wanted to listen. He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "People in this town have connections. You know?" She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Thank you, Carter. I'll be careful with this information." That night, she stayed late, poring over the Carter case with renewed determination. The clues were faint, fragmented, but there was something there, a thread she could tug, a lead worth following. She traced Emily's last days, retraced the investigation, piecing together a timeline that had gone ignored for far too long. This was what Harper lived for, the thrill of the chase. The quiet unraveling of a story only she could see. Her intuition screamed that something had been buried here, something everyone else had chosen to forget. The next morning, she found herself on the receiving end of cold stares as she walked into the briefing room. Bradshaw was openly glaring at her, while Roberts regarded her with an unreadable expression. "Chief," Roberts began, his tone wary, "word around town is you're stirring up old wounds. Some folks aren't happy about that. I'm not here to make people happy, Deputy Roberts," she replied calmly. "I'm here to solve cases. If that makes people uncomfortable, they can take it up with the law." But her words did little to quell the resentment. She was pushing buttons, testing boundaries, and the men around her didn't like it. They tried to make her work harder, throwing her off her game with last-minute changes, incomplete files, and accidental miscommunications. But Harper took it all in stride, refusing to be deterred. She knew that each challenge they threw at her was a test, and she was determined to pass every single one. As weeks went by, she began to notice subtle changes. Officer Carter seemed more willing to assist her, offering small but invaluable insights. A few other officers softened, grudgingly acknowledging her determination, but Bradshaw, Wilson, and a handful of others remained resistant, determined to see her fail. They'd done things a certain way for years, and they weren't about to let an outsider, let alone a black woman, come in and change that. One night, just as Harper was leaving the precinct, she found her car vandalized, the tires slashed, a note scrawled in red ink across the windshield. "Go back to where you came from." She stood there, the night air cold around her, the message clear and chilling. She could feel her heart pounding, a mixture of anger and hurt rising within her. But she took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had come this far, she wouldn't back down now. She snapped a photo of the note, determined to hold those responsible accountable, knowing full well that confronting this wouldn't be easy. The silent hostility, the small acts of sabotage, the disdainful glares, it was all fuel. If they wanted to intimidate her, they'd have to do much more. She straightened her shoulders, turning away from her car and walking back into the precinct, her eyes blazing with determination. She would show them that their intimidation tactics were wasted on her. Chief Harper Jones was here to stay. And no amount of hatred would drive her away. Harper stepped into the precinct early the next morning, a storm of emotions churning beneath her calm exterior. The note on her car was a blatant warning, yet she refused to let it shake her. If anything, it fueled her resolve. She was ready to show them what she was made of. The day began with a briefing on an ongoing case that had left the community anxious, a string of home invasions that had disrupted the quiet of Bucksville's wealthier neighborhoods. The robberies were calculated and precise, targeting valuable items and leaving few clues behind. With little evidence, the case was already going cold, and some officers seemed resigned to letting it fade into the background. But Harper had no intention of letting it go unsolved. "Wilson, Kane, I want you to revisit the neighborhoods where the break-ins happened," she instructed, her tone firm and direct. "Speak to anyone you missed the first time. Review any security footage you can get. And make sure you cover every angle." Wilson sighed, rolling his eyes, but he nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Chief," he muttered, the words dripping with irritation. Harper didn't miss a beat. "And bring me the reports by the end of the day," she added, making it clear that she wouldn't tolerate any more delays or half-hearted efforts. As they filed out, Deputy Roberts approached her, his expression guarded. "Chief, if I may," he began, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one else was listening. "The men, they're not used to this kind of scrutiny. Things were more relaxed under Chief Dawson. Maybe they need time to adjust." She met his gaze, unflinching. "They need to understand that their job is to protect this town, not to get comfortable. And if they can't handle the scrutiny, they're welcome to find work elsewhere." Roberts looked as if he wanted to say more, but he simply nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Harper knew that Roberts wasn't trying to undermine her. He was simply a man caught between loyalty to his fellow officers and his duty to his new chief. But she couldn't afford to back down now, not when she was finally making headway. Later that day, Officer Carter came by her office with a lead on the Carter case, the cold case she had reopened. He handed her a stack of old photos and a few transcripts from interviews that had never made it into the official report. "I thought these might help," he said, his voice low. "It's not much, but there were rumors back then. People saying Emily had connections to someone powerful in town. Maybe someone didn't want the case to get too much attention." Harper took the photos, studying them closely. Each one showed Emily with friends, laughing and carefree, a stark contrast to the brutal end she had met. "Thank you, Carter," she said, her voice softening. "This could be exactly what we need." Carter hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might see him helping her. "I know most of the guys aren't, well, they're not giving you the respect you deserve. But I wanted you to know, not all of us feel that way. Some of us, we're glad you're here." Harper felt a warmth in her chest, a spark of encouragement she hadn't realized she needed. "That means a lot, Carter. Thank you." With Carter's support, she dug deeper into the case, spending late nights piecing together clues, going through witness statements, and mapping out possible motives. She started seeing a pattern that others had missed, or chosen to ignore. It was clear that someone with influence had been involved in Emily's life, and they'd gone to great lengths to ensure the case stayed buried. Meanwhile, the home invasion case was progressing slowly, but Harper's persistence began to bear fruit. When Wilson and Kane reluctantly handed in their reports, she combed through them with a meticulous eye, finding inconsistencies and asking questions that made them visibly uncomfortable. Bit by bit, she assembled a picture of the burglaries that pointed to an organized group, possibly with insider knowledge of the neighborhood's security systems. "Chief, with all due respect," Wilson said one evening after she'd questioned him about a discrepancy in his report, "don't you think you're being a bit intense? We're doing the best we can here. It's just a few break-ins, not a murder spree." Harper met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Those few break-ins represent families who feel unsafe in their own homes. Our job isn't to decide what cases are worth our attention, it's to protect this town. If you're not up for that, Officer Wilson, then perhaps this isn't the right place for you." Her words hung in the air, the weight of her authority settling over the room. Wilson's face darkened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he gave a curt nod and left, muttering under his breath. As days turned into weeks, Harper's relentless dedication began to show results. She uncovered a series of small but significant connections in the home invasion case. tracing back to a local contractor who had installed security systems in the targeted homes. The contractor, when questioned, eventually admitted that he'd been approached by a gang from a nearby town, paid to share security details for a cut of the profits. The news of her success spread quickly. The officers, even the most resistant ones, couldn't deny her skill. She had taken a cold case and brought it to a boiling point. Her instincts and dedication proving sharper than they'd anticipated. It was the kind of result they hadn't seen in years. And for the first time, a few of them started to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who could actually make a difference. However, the breakthrough didn't come without backlash. Late one night, as she was leaving the precinct, she found a threatening note slipped under her windshield wiper. The message was clear and laced with venom. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Harper's fingers tightened around the note, but she refused to let fear take hold. Whoever was behind this was desperate, and that meant she was close to uncovering something important. She knew she had to press on, even if it meant putting herself at risk. In the days that followed, Harper's commitment to both the Carter case and the home invasions earned her a grudging respect from some of her colleagues. Officer Carter continued to assist her discreetly, and a few others started following her lead, working harder, staying late, and putting in the effort that they'd previously withheld. But for every small victory, there were still those who resented her presence, those who waited for her to fail. One day, while reviewing an old interview in the Carter case, Harper stumbled upon a new lead. She found that a key witness, a local bar owner who had been close to Emily, had left town shortly after her death. The original investigators had dismissed him as unimportant, but Harper sensed there was more to the story. She tracked down his last known address and, with Officer Carter accompanying her, drove out to find him. When they arrived, they found the bar owner, a nervous man named Frank, who looked as if he hadn't slept in days. He hesitated at first, his gaze darting to Officer Carter as if seeking an ally. But Harper's calm, unwavering gaze eventually broke through his defenses. "I know it's been years, Frank," she said gently, "but Emily's family deserves answers. And so do you." Frank sighed, his shoulders slumping. I saw things I shouldn't have," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were people in this town, powerful people. They didn't want her talking. They made sure of it." Harper's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Who are they, Frank? Tell me everything." He hesitated, then whispered a name that sent a shock through her. It was someone she'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. She knew that if she pursued this, it could shake the very foundations of Bucksville. But there was no turning back now. Returning to the precinct, she briefed her team, keeping her findings limited to those she could trust. She knew the risks, knew that even within her department, there were those who would try to protect the powerful figures implicated in the case. But with Officer Carter by her side, she pressed forward, gathering evidence, conducting interviews, and piecing together a web of corruption that had been hidden for far too long. As the investigation intensified, so did the pressure from those who wanted her gone. Rumors spread, and the hostility she faced grew fiercer. But Harper stood firm. She was no longer just fighting for justice, she was fighting for her place, her authority, and the respect she deserved. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to shift. Her victories in the home invasion case, her relentless pursuit of truth in the Carter case, and her unwavering strength in the face of adversity started to earn her the grudging respect of even her most skeptical colleagues. Officer Wilson, once openly hostile, started showing up to briefings early, his posture less defensive, his tone more respectful. Even Bradshaw, though still distant, began following her instructions without complaint. As Part 2 concludes, Harper stands at the brink of a breakthrough in the Carter case. The pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. Her team, though still divided, is beginning to see her not as an outsider, but as the formidable leader she is. The journey has been grueling, and the danger is far from over. But for the first time, Harper feels the weight of respect, the kind she's fought for all her life, starting to settle around her shoulders. But she knows that the hardest part is still to come as Harper continued her relentless investigation. She could sense the walls closing in around her. Each lead she uncovered in the Carter case seemed to pull her closer to a truth that others had purposefully ignored. The weight of hidden secrets hung over the department like a storm cloud. And Harper was determined to face it, no matter how dark it got. One evening, she received an anonymous tip. A handwritten note slipped under her office door. "Look in the abandoned storage unit on the east side of town." The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, as though the writer was terrified. Harper knew the area. The old storage units were a forgotten part of Bucksville, left to gather dust and spider webs. Most officers wouldn't think twice about investigating a lead like this, especially on a cold case. But Harper trusted her instincts. She felt this tip was more than just a wild goose chase. That night, as the moon cast eerie shadows over the empty lot, Harper and Officer Carter made their way to the units, their flashlights piercing the darkness. Inside one of the units, beneath layers of dust, they discovered a stack of old photographs and letters, all linked to Emily Carter. The photos showed her with a man, older, well-dressed, with a familiar face that Harper immediately recognized. It was Councilman Tomlin, a prominent figure in Bucksville. The same man who had publicly supported the police department but had secretly avoided speaking about Emily's case. "This is big, Chief," Carter whispered, his voice taut with anxiety. "If Tomlin's involved, we're talking about a cover-up that goes all the way to the top." Harper nodded, adrenaline pulsing through her veins. She knew that Councilman Tomlin was connected to half the town, from the precinct to City Hall. If he had a hand in covering up Emily's death, uncovering it would be like setting off an explosion. But Harper had come too far to turn back. Returning to the precinct, she carefully catalogued every piece of evidence, keeping it locked away in her personal files. But she could feel eyes on her. The hostility in the precinct grew thicker by the day. Her fellow officers seemed to watch her every move, their expressions a mix of suspicion and resentment. Bradshaw, Wilson, and even Deputy Roberts had started making thinly veiled comments, suggesting she was getting too close to things that didn't concern her. One morning, as Harper was reviewing case files, Bradshaw approached her desk, a smug smile on his face. "Chief, you sure you want to keep digging up the past?" he asked, leaning in close. "Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." Harper looked up, meeting his gaze with steely determination. "If you're suggesting I should ignore evidence and close this case, you're in the wrong profession." "Bradshaw," he chuckled, shaking his head, "suit yourself, Chief, but don't say I didn't warn you. People around here, they don't like change, or outsiders who think they know better." Ignoring his threat, Harper refocused on her work. But Bradshaw's words lingered in her mind. She knew he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was echoing the sentiments of those who wanted her gone. Those who would rather see the truth buried than brought to light. Over the next few weeks, Harper worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence, interviewing witnesses, and following leads that had been overlooked or ignored. Every night, she reviewed the files alone in her office, her desk lamp casting a lone circle of light in the darkness. But the more she uncovered, the more resistance she faced. Files went missing, witnesses suddenly refused to talk, and even Carter, her one ally, started receiving anonymous threats. Then, one night, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was low and unrecognizable. "Back off, Chief," the caller warned, his tone laced with menace. "Keep digging, and you'll end up just like Emily." Harper's heart pounded, but she maintained her composure. "Who is this?" The line went dead. She sat in silence, her hands gripping the phone tightly. This was more than a warning, it was a promise. Whoever was behind Emily's murder, and the subsequent cover-up, had no intention of letting Harper expose the truth. But fear wasn't enough to stop her. She had faced threats before, and she wouldn't back down now. She made up her mind that the only way to end this was to see it through to the bitter end. The following morning, Harper confronted Deputy Roberts in his office. She knew he was caught between loyalty to the town and his duty to her. But she needed to know where he stood. "Roberts, I need to know if I can trust you," she said, her voice steady but firm. "This case is about more than just justice for Emily. It's about cleaning up this department and making sure that the people responsible are held accountable. But I can't do that if I'm fighting against my own team." Roberts sighed, his gaze troubled. "Chief, you're stirring up a hornet's nest. This town, it has secrets. People who've been in power for a long time. You start taking them down, and they'll come after you with everything they've got." "I'm not afraid of them," Harper replied, her eyes flashing with determination. I'm here to serve this town, not to protect those who abuse their power." He looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right, Chief, you've got my support. Just be careful. These people don't play fair." With Roberts on her side, Harper pushed forward, interviewing Councilman Tomlin under the pretense of a routine inquiry. His demeanor was calm, almost indifferent, but Harper noticed a flicker of discomfort when she mentioned Emily Carter's name. She pressed him, watching for any hint of guilt, any sign that he was involved. But Tomlin was a master of manipulation, deflecting her questions with practiced ease. As the days went on, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Harper uncovered financial records linking Tomlin to several powerful families in Bucksville, families with deep ties to the police department, local businesses, and even the judiciary. It became clear that Emily had discovered something that threatened these families, and they'd gone to great lengths to silence her. One evening, Harper was working late in her office when she heard a knock on the door. She looked up to see Officer Wilson standing there, a strange look on his face. "Chief, I thought you should know," he began, his voice low. "I overheard Bradshaw talking to some guys down at the bar. He was saying that he's got friends in high places. Friends who'd be willing to deal with anyone who stirs up trouble." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying Bradshaw's involved in the cover-up?" Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "I don't have proof, but he's been meeting with people, powerful people, and they're not happy with you. Chief, you're getting too close." Harper thanked him, her mind racing. If Bradshaw was involved, it meant her own department was compromised. She couldn't trust anyone, not fully. The web of corruption went deeper than she'd realized, and the danger was greater than ever. Determined to expose the truth, Harper took her findings to the state authorities, bypassing the precinct and ensuring that her evidence was in safe hands. She knew this move would put her in even greater danger, but she had no choice. She'd come too far to let fear hold her back now. The night after she submitted the evidence, Harper was driving home when she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror. The car was following her, keeping a steady distance. Her instincts kicked in, and she took a series of turns, hoping to lose her tail. But the car kept pace, its headlights glaring, a silent threat that sent a chill down her spine. Suddenly, the car surged forward, ramming into her rear bumper. Harper gripped the wheel, her heart pounding as she fought to control the vehicle. Another impact, harder this time, sent her car skidding off the road, crashing into a ditch. She scrambled out, her pulse racing, as the other car screeched to a halt. Two men stepped out, their faces obscured in the darkness. "You should have left well enough alone, Chief," one of them sneered, advancing toward her. Harper reached for her sidearm, her fingers steady as she aimed at them. "Take another step, and you'll regret it." The men hesitated, then exchanged a glance before retreating to their car and speeding off into the night. Harper watched them go, her breath coming in gasps as she steadied herself. She knew now that they were willing to go to any lengths to stop her. The following day, bruised but unshaken, she returned to the precinct, her resolve stronger than ever. Her near-death experience had only solidified her determination to see the case through. Word of her confrontation quickly spread through the department, and for the first time, even her most resistant colleagues looked at her with a mixture of respect and awe. Bradshaw, however, was nowhere to be seen. Rumors circulated that he'd taken a sudden leave of absence. But Harper knew better. He was running, hiding from the truth that she was about to unleash. With Roberts, Carter, and a handful of trusted officers by her side, she prepared for the final phase of her investigation, ready to confront the corruption that had festered in Bucksville for far too long. As Part 2 draws to a close, Harper stands on the brink of exposing a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of Bucksville's power structure. She's faced threats, sabotage, and even an attempt on her life. But she's come out stronger, earning the respect of her team and proving herself as a leader who will stop at nothing to uphold justice. The stage is set for the ultimate showdown, and Harper knows that the fight for truth is just beginning. The pressure weighed heavily on Harper, but she refused to show weakness. Each day brought her closer to the truth, and with each step, the dangers surrounding her intensified. She could feel it in the air, the tension in the precinct, the wary glances of her officers, and the nervous murmurs whenever she walked into a room. Her investigation was shaking Bucksville's very foundation, and those who stood to lose everything were beginning to make their move. Her team, initially reluctant, had started showing tentative signs of loyalty. Officer Carter remained steadfast by her side, and Deputy Roberts, though torn, supported her in his quiet, steadfast way. Even Wilson, who had once been openly hostile, now seemed to respect her, sharing valuable information and hinting at his growing loyalty. But Bradshaw, the most vocal opponent, had become increasingly elusive. His absence felt like an omen, a reminder of the shadows lurking within her own ranks. One afternoon, as Harper sifted through old witness statements, a courier arrived at her office with a sealed envelope. She glanced at the name on it, an alias she recognized from earlier parts of the investigation. Harper's heart quickened. Whoever had sent this knew things she was only beginning to uncover. Carefully, she opened the envelope to find a single, typed note. The truth isn't what you think. Meet me tonight, 8 p.m., the abandoned church. The message was as ominous as it was intriguing. She glanced at Carter, who had entered her office, a concerned expression on his face. I've been given a tip, she said, showing him the note, but this feels like a trap. Carter's eyes narrowed. Chief, it's dangerous. You've already been threatened. You can't walk into this without backup. Harper shook her head, resolute. If they wanted me dead, they wouldn't bother with a meeting. They want to scare me off. But if there's a chance this lead is genuine, I have to follow it. Reluctantly, Carter agreed, offering to be nearby as backup. That night, they parked on opposite sides of the abandoned church, a crumbling relic on the edge of town, shrouded in darkness and silence. Harper moved carefully through the shadows, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The tension was thick, every sound amplified, every shadow suspect. She reached the altar, her eyes scanning the darkness. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in his 60s with graying hair and a scar across his cheek. Harper recognized him immediately. He was Jerry Holden, a former councilman with a tarnished reputation. He'd left town years ago under dubious circumstances. The town had whispered about his secrets, but nothing had ever been proven. Chief Jones, he greeted her, his voice low, almost a whisper. You're more persistent than I expected. Persistence is part of the job, she replied, keeping her gaze steady. Why did you want to meet? Holden's gaze shifted, haunted. I left this town to escape. But some things have a way of pulling you back. Emily Carter's case, it's the reason I left. She knew too much, and so did I. The people in power here, they aren't who you think they are. Harper felt a chill run down her spine. Who are you talking about? Holden? Who was responsible for Emily's death? He hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to leap from the shadows. The Carters were a respected family. But Emily, she discovered something she wasn't supposed to. Councilman Tomlin and his associates, powerful families with old money, they were running an illegal reign. Drugs, money laundering, blackmail. Emily found out by accident. And when she threatened to go public, they silenced her. Harper's heart pounded. This was the confirmation she'd been seeking. The missing piece in the puzzle. But Holden's fear was palpable. And she knew that revealing this information would shake the town to its core. Why tell me this now? Why not come forward years ago? Holden's face twisted with regret. I was young, ambitious. I thought I could play along and get out when things got too dangerous. But by then, they had me trapped. I left, but I'll never escape them. They'll come for me, just like they're coming for you. I didn't want to get involved again. But maybe it's time they finally face justice. Just as he finished speaking, a shot rang out. Harper ducked instinctively, reaching for her weapon. She looked up to see Holden clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers as he stumbled backward. Another shot echoed through the empty church, and Harper threw herself to the ground, pulling Holden behind a pillar. Holden, stay with me, she urged, pressing a hand to his wound. His breathing was shallow, his eyes clouding. Who's doing this? Give me a name. He coughed, his grip on her arm weak. It's Bradshaw. He's been protecting them. Watch your back, Chief. With those final words, Holden's hand went limp, his head falling to the side as his breath left him. Harper felt a wave of grief and frustration wash over her. He had been her only link to the truth. And now he was gone. Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing closer. Harper's pulse raced. She pressed herself against the pillar, listening as her assailant moved through the church. His footsteps cautious yet relentless. She waited until he was near, then leapt from the shadows, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in silence, a desperate, brutal struggle. She managed to pin him down, her eyes widening as she recognized him. It was Bradshaw. His face twisted in fury. "So it's true," she hissed. "You've been protecting them, covering up their crimes." Bradshaw sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't know anything, Chief. You're just a naive outsider trying to play hero. Bucksville's secrets aren't for people like you." Harper tightened her grip, rage boiling within her. "I'm here to protect this town, even if it's from people like you." With a final shove, she pulled out her handcuffs and restrained him, her heart pounding as she took in the reality of what had just happened. Bradshaw's betrayal was a wound in her department, a symbol of the corruption she had sworn to eradicate. But as she looked down at him, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over her. She had exposed a key player in the web of deception that had plagued Bucksville for years. The fallout was immediate. Harper returned to the precinct, evidence in hand, and had Bradshaw formally charged. She made no secret of his role in protecting Councilman Tomlin and his criminal associates. And within hours, word spread through the town. The scandal rocked Bucksville, and people began to realize that the police department, once considered a cornerstone of their community, had been compromised. Her officers were divided. Some watched her with newfound respect, their loyalty shifting as they saw her determination to clean up the precinct. Others, still entrenched in old loyalties, kept their distance, wary and resentful. But Harper had proven herself, and she could feel the tide turning. Even those who resented her presence could no longer deny her dedication and courage. Councilman Tomlin, now aware that Harper was closing in on him, went into hiding. But Harper was relentless. With her team's support, she pursued every lead, dismantling the network of corruption piece by piece. The townspeople, initially wary of her as an outsider, began to rally behind her. The community meetings were packed with people who applauded her efforts, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. In a final show of solidarity, Carter, Roberts, and even Wilson offered to testify against Bradshaw, supporting Harper's case and sharing their own experiences with the corruption that had infested their department. One by one, they recounted incidents, covering for Bradshaw's questionable decisions, manipulating evidence to protect powerful figures, and the fear that had kept them silent for so long. As the testimonies piled up, Harper could feel the weight of victory drawing near. She had exposed a legacy of corruption, brought down those who had long held power, and won the respect of her team and her town. The council convened a special meeting, and Councilman Tomlin was officially stripped of his position, facing charges that would finally bring him to justice. In the days that followed, Harper found herself in the precinct, standing before her officers, many of whom looked at her with newfound respect. Carter gave her a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the trust she'd earned. Even Roberts, once hesitant, stood by her side, a look of pride in his eyes. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her journey settle around her. She had come to Bucksville as an outsider, met with hostility and resistance at every turn. But now, she was their chief, not because of her title, but because she had proven herself worthy of it. She had stood against a system designed to break her, and she had won. As she looked around the room, a sense of peace washed over her. She knew there would be more battles, more challenges, but for the first time, she felt the strength of a team that believed in her, a town that had finally accepted her as one of their own. And she knew, without a doubt, that she had found her place. The night Harper took down Bradshaw, the tension in Bucksville broke wide open. News of his arrest and the exposure of his connections to Councilman Tomlin's corruption spread like wildfire. The town was in an uproar, and Harper knew that Tomlin and his associates would be desperate, doing everything in their power to hold on to what little influence they had left. In the days that followed, Harper's office became a command center for the ongoing investigation. Officers who had once viewed her with suspicion now looked to her with newfound respect. Carter and Roberts worked tirelessly by her side, combing through mountains of paperwork, following leads, and gathering testimonies from citizens who had long feared speaking up. The pressure was mounting, but Harper felt more focused than ever. They were on the brink of dismantling a network of corruption that had poisoned Bucksville for decades. One night, Harper was alone in her office, reviewing a stack of new evidence when a quiet knock broke her concentration. She looked up to see Officer Wilson, his face a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Chief," he began, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "There's something you need to know, something I've kept hidden because I was afraid." Bradshaw, he wasn't the only one. Tomlin has allies in every corner of this town. Some of them are, well, they're people you'd least expect. Harper motioned for him to continue. Her interest piqued. "Go on, Wilson, this is important." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "There's a group. They call themselves the Guardians of Bucksville. They've operated in the shadows for years, enforcing a code to keep outsiders from disrupting the town. They believe they're protecting our way of life. But in reality, they're a gang of criminals in business suits. They own businesses, control finances, and manipulate local politics to keep themselves in power." Harper's heart pounded as the weight of his words sank in. She had heard rumors of this group, but never had concrete proof of its existence, until now. "How many are involved?" "Dozens, maybe more," Wilson replied. "They meet in secret, cover for each other, and punish anyone who tries to expose them. Bradshaw was just a pawn. Tomlin is one of the ringleaders. But there are others, people who are just as dangerous. Thank you for telling me this, Wilson," she said, her tone laced with gratitude. "It's a risk, coming forward like this." He nodded, a flicker of respect in his gaze. "I've seen what you're capable of, Chief. You're the first person who's ever stood up to them. I figured it was time I did the same." With Wilson's revelations, Harper knew they were dealing with something much bigger than she had anticipated. The Guardians of Bucksville were a powerful organization, deeply entrenched in the town's fabric. Taking them down would require more than just arrests. It would demand an all-out war on the corruption that had kept them in control. The following day, Harper called an emergency meeting with her trusted officers, Carter, Roberts, and now Wilson among them. She laid out a plan to systematically gather evidence, identify each member of the Guardians, and build a case that would be impossible to ignore or bury. They would work around the clock, collecting statements from business owners, former associates, and even council members who had grown weary of Tomlin's reign. Each officer had a role. Carter was responsible for combing through financial records, searching for suspicious transactions that connected the Guardians to illegal activities. Roberts coordinated with state authorities to ensure they had support beyond the town's borders. Wilson, whose knowledge of the group's inner workings was invaluable, helped Harper trace the Guardians' meetings and contacts. Their teamwork was a testament to how far they had come under her leadership. They were no longer a divided department. They were a united front against the corruption that had plagued their town. As the investigation progressed, Harper felt the weight of her responsibilities grow heavier. She had finally won the respect of her team. But she knew that the closer they got to the truth, the greater the risks became. The Guardians were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Harper was prepared. She had worked her entire career for this moment, to stand against injustice, no matter the cost. One evening, just as they were closing in on the final pieces of evidence, a break-in occurred at the precinct. Files were scattered, computers were smashed, and weeks of hard work lay in ruins. Harper stood in the wreckage, her heart sinking as she took in the devastation. This was a message, a warning that they were getting too close. Carter approached her, his face grim. "They're scared, Chief. They wouldn't have done this if they didn't feel threatened." She nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "They think they can intimidate us. But all they've done is show us that we're on the right track. We rebuild. We recollect every file, every lead. They won't get away with this." With renewed determination, Harper and her team worked tirelessly to recover what they could, piecing the evidence back together. The townspeople, hearing of the break-in, rallied behind her, offering support and protection. Business owners who had once feared the Guardians began speaking out, sharing their own stories of intimidation and manipulation. The community's solidarity was a powerful force, one that the Guardians could not control. But Harper knew the Guardians weren't finished. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Late one night, as Harper reviewed the files, she received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, and a familiar voice came through, the voice of Councilman Tomlin. "Chief Jones," he drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. "You've caused quite a stir. You're jeopardizing things you don't understand. Bucksville has a way of dealing with troublemakers. Harper's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Is that a threat, Councilman? It's a fact, he replied smoothly. This town has operated under certain rules for a long time. People like you don't belong here. You can either leave quietly, or you can suffer the consequences. Harper felt a surge of anger, but she remained calm. Councilman Tomlin, I'm not going anywhere. Bucksville deserves better than your lies and your manipulation. And I won't stop until you and every one of your so-called guardians are brought to justice. He chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. We'll see about that, Chief. We'll see. The line went dead, but Harper knew this was only the beginning. Tomlin's threat echoed in her mind, but it only strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just fighting for her department, she was fighting for the soul of Bucksville. The next day, she intensified her efforts, pulling in state authorities to protect her team and safeguard the investigation. With Carter's help, they traced the Guardian's financial transactions to offshore accounts, revealing a network of money laundering and illegal investments that tied directly back to Tomlin and his allies. Each new discovery brought them closer to dismantling the Guardian's hold on the town. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. Armed with a mountain of evidence, Harper and her team coordinated a series of raids across Bucksville, targeting the homes and businesses of those involved with the Guardians. The raids were swift and precise, uncovering hidden safes, secret ledgers, and incriminating documents that exposed the full extent of the Guardian's corruption. Councilman Tomlin, cornered and desperate, tried to flee, but Harper was there to intercept him. She confronted him in his mansion, her presence a symbol of the justice he had long evaded. It's over, Tomlin, she said, her voice unwavering. You can't hide anymore. He sneered, attempting one final deflection. Do you think arresting me will change anything, Chief? I am Bucksville. I built this town. Harper shook her head, her gaze steely. You built a prison of fear and lies. But Bucksville doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. And they've chosen to stand against you. With that, she placed him in handcuffs, a fitting end to his reign of corruption. As they escorted him out, the townspeople gathered outside, their faces filled with relief and triumph. They cheered for Harper, for her bravery and dedication. In that moment, she knew that every struggle, every threat, every sleepless night had been worth it. In the days that followed, Bucksville began to rebuild. The Guardians had been dismantled, their influence shattered. The department, once fractured by distrust, now stood united under Harper's leadership. She had not only earned the respect of her team but had become a symbol of strength and integrity for the entire town. Her officers, who had once resisted her, now looked to her with admiration and loyalty. Carter, Roberts, and Wilson stood by her side, a team forged in the fires of adversity. They had faced their darkest fears together, and they had emerged stronger. As Harper walked through the precinct, her heart swelled with pride. Bucksville was no longer the town it had once been. It was a place of justice, a place where the people could trust their leaders. And as she looked out over her team, she knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter defined by unity, resilience, and hope. Harper had come to Bucksville as an outsider, a stranger in a town that had resisted change. But now, she was more than just their chief. She was their leader, their protector, their ally, and as long as she wore the badge, she would continue to fight for them, no matter the cost. The aftermath of the initial raids rippled through Bucksville. The town was alive with whispers, every corner buzzing with rumors about who would be arrested next, what secrets would come to light, and whether life in Bucksville could ever truly return to normal. For Harper, the victory over Councilman Tomlin and the exposure of the Guardians was a breakthrough. But she knew their work wasn't done. The Guardians were a web, and she had only begun to cut the strands. Despite the exhaustion settling in, Harper gathered her team for a debriefing the day after Tomlin's arrest. Her officers, including Carter, Roberts, and Wilson, looked at her with respect and trust that had been hard-won through sweat and sacrifice. They were no longer the team of resistant officers and an outsider chief. They were united, bound by their commitment to bring justice to their town. Harper stood at the front of the room, her voice steady as she spoke. We've taken down some of the most influential figures in Bucksville, but our job isn't finished. There are still allies and associates of Tomlin's hiding in plain sight. Some may have fled, others may be lying low, but I'm certain they're still watching. waiting for their chance to reclaim their power. The officers listened intently, their expressions a mix of determination and vigilance. Wilson raised his hand. "Chief, what about the remaining members of the Guardians? Do we know who they are? Some of them might be planning to retaliate. And if they go underground, we might lose our lead on them." Harper nodded, understanding the gravity of his question. "We've already uncovered several names tied to the Guardians through financial records and testimonies. But we'll need more than suspicion to bring them down. We need concrete evidence. They'll be more careful now that we've taken out some of their leadership. But that only means we have to be even more vigilant." Harper assigned new roles, creating a special task force within the department dedicated solely to the Guardians. Carter would lead the forensic investigation team, diving deeper into the financial records and communications they had seized. Roberts would be in charge of gathering intelligence from state authorities, tracing connections between Bucksville's Guardians and outside associates. Wilson, whose knowledge of the town's hidden social dynamics had already proven invaluable, was tasked with undercover operations, observing anyone still connected to the Guardians who might pose a threat. As her officers left the room, Harper felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Carter standing behind her, his face etched with both concern and admiration. "Chief," he began, his voice low, "you've done something remarkable here. People are talking about you all over Bucksville. They're calling you the real guardian of this town. They're inspired." Harper offered a small, appreciative smile. "It's not just me, Carter. We've all worked for this. Bucksville is our town, and we're in this fight together. But thank you." Carter nodded, his eyes full of respect. "I just wanted you to know that we're behind you. All of us. Whatever's next, we're with you." The days that followed were a blur of intense work, long hours, and unwavering commitment. Harper and her team methodically investigated each new lead, tracing the Guardians' influence to its very edges. With every step closer they got, the Guardians grew bolder, employing every tactic they could to undermine her efforts. Harper received anonymous threats, warnings that she was in over her head. But she was undeterred. She knew that fear was their weapon, and she refused to give them that power over her. One evening, while reviewing surveillance footage with Wilson, Harper noticed something unusual. A man frequently visiting one of Bucksville's wealthiest businessmen. Thomas Gray. Gray was known for his charitable contributions to the town and his public support of community initiatives. He was the last person anyone would suspect of being a guardian. But the man's association with him suggested otherwise. "Wilson, pull up everything we have on Thomas Gray," Harper instructed, her instincts alerting her to something significant. Wilson nodded, typing furiously as he brought up records on Gray. "He's got investments in local businesses, even some charitable foundations. But there's something strange here. Chief, look at this." He pointed to a series of transactions, large sums transferred between Gray's accounts and several shell companies linked to offshore banks. It was a classic money laundering setup, one designed to hide substantial assets from prying eyes. Harper's suspicions were confirmed. Gray's public image was a facade, hiding the same criminal activity that Tomlin and the other Guardians had been involved in. But Gray was smart. He had layers of protection, making him difficult to reach through conventional means. That night, Harper made a decision. She called a private meeting with Carter, Roberts, and Wilson, outlining a plan that would test every ounce of their courage and cunning. "We need to gather direct evidence on Gray," she explained. "I want to know everything about his operations, where his money comes from, who his connections are, and what he's trying to hide. Wilson, I'll need you to go undercover. Gray doesn't know that we're onto him yet, and we can use that to our advantage." Wilson's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, his resolve unshakable. "Consider it done, Chief." As Wilson infiltrated Gray's network, posing as an insider looking to move up in the organization, Harper worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with the state authorities to build a rock-solid case. The risks were enormous. Wilson was operating alone, feeding Harper crucial information whenever he could without blowing his cover. The rest of the team was on high alert, prepared for any emergency. Days turned into weeks as Wilson worked his way deeper into Gray's inner circle. He discovered that Gray was more than just a participant in the Guardians. He was one of its masterminds, orchestrating criminal activities while maintaining his public image as a philanthropic businessman. The information he provided was invaluable. revealing that Gray had close ties with other prominent figures across the state, all connected by their shared interests in power and wealth. Finally, Harper and her team had what they needed. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Harper coordinated with state authorities to plan a multi-department raid on Gray's estate and his various business fronts, leaving no stone unturned. It would be the final, decisive blow to the Guardians, the culmination of all their work. The night of the raid, Bucksville was tense. Harper and her team moved in silence, approaching Gray's mansion from multiple directions. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she and Carter led the operation. Roberts coordinated with the backup team, while Wilson, having returned safely from his undercover mission, waited alongside them, his expression resolute. As they breached the mansion, Harper led her officers through the rooms, each corner revealing the opulence of Gray's life, funded by the corruption and suffering of others. In Gray's office, she found him waiting, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. "You're making a mistake, Chief Jones," he said coldly, standing behind his desk. "You don't understand what you're doing. This town needs men like me, people who understand its needs, who know how to keep it safe." Harper shook her head, her voice firm. "Bucksville doesn't need men like you, Mr. Gray. It needs people who value justice and integrity. And that's something you'll never understand." Gray sneered, his arrogance unfazed. "You think this will change anything? Even if you take me down, there will always be others. Men like me built this town, and men like me will keep it." Harper stepped forward, her gaze unflinching. "Then we'll tear down everything you've built if we have to. This ends now." With a nod to Carter, she had Gray placed under arrest. As they escorted him out, officers seized records, computer files, and anything that could serve as evidence in the impending trial. Gray's empire was crumbling, and with it, the remnants of the Guardians' power in Bucksville. The trial that followed was one of the most publicized events in the town's history. Testimonies from former members of the Guardians, financial experts, and even some of Harper's own team painted a clear picture of the corruption that had gripped Bucksville for decades. Harper's presence was a beacon of justice, her composure and unwavering dedication resonating with everyone in the courtroom. When the guilty verdict came down, a wave of relief and triumph swept through Bucksville. The Guardians' power was shattered, and the town had finally broken free from the grip of corruption. Harper had not only fulfilled her duty but had transformed the town into a place where justice could thrive. A place where people could finally feel safe. In the days following the trial, Harper's life returned to a sense of normalcy. Though nothing would ever quite be the same, she was a hero in Bucksville, admired by the townspeople and respected by her team. But she remained humble, aware that her victory was a shared one, achieved through the courage and unity of her department and the community. As she walked through the precinct one morning, a sense of peace settled over her. The hostile stares, the whispers, the resistance, they were gone. In their place were nods of respect, words of gratitude, and a loyalty that was genuine. Her officers, once skeptical and resistant, now looked to her with trust and admiration, knowing she had fought for them as much as she had fought for the town. Carter approached her, a warm smile on his face. "Chief, it's a new day in Bucksville. Thanks to you." Harper smiled back, a quiet pride in her eyes. "It's thanks to all of us. Carter, we're a team, and this town, it's ours to protect." The department had been tested in ways few could imagine, but they had emerged stronger, united, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Harper knew that her journey in Bucksville was far from over, but she welcomed the road ahead, knowing that she had finally found a place where she belonged, a place she had helped transform. And as she looked out over her team, her town, her home, she knew that together, they would continue to stand against any darkness that dared threaten Bucksville's newfound light. The town had been reborn, and Chief Harper Jones was its unwavering guardian, its defender, its leader in the end. Chief Harper Jones transformed Bucksville, not only by dismantling corruption but by uniting a community and a department once divided by mistrust. Her resilience, integrity, and courage redefined justice for the town, leaving a legacy of strength and hope. Bucksville would never be the same.